and welcome back to another episode um, uh, or live stream. And today we are going to be going over AWS startups. So let me present my screen and then we will get straight into it. All right. So starting off with day one, which talks about developing an idea. So a founder's first goal is to create a product which solves a conflict for consumers. And founders should ask these questions when coming up with an idea. Like who is the product for? Why is the product needed? What problem does it solve? Is this important enough? And is there an actual need for this product itself? And a quote from Steve Blank, who's a famous Silicon Valley entrepreneur, is more startups fail from a lack of customers than from a failure of product development. So moving on, we start to go into more detail about finding a co-founder. So the most successful startups have both a founder and a co-founder. But despite this, most failures in startups are usually caused by conflicts between the two founders. Because of that, it's important that you know you're truthful about your strengths and your weaknesses in order to find a co-founder who complements your specific skills. Certain tips for hiring are as follows. So for example, don't give everyone a high title, don't follow major companies' recruiting techniques, hire those who have faith in your company, and also have trial periods for potential employees. So, understanding equity and compensation models. It's important that you don't leave anything out of the discussion when it comes to equity distributions amongst co founders. This is because an unequal split of equity or profit can ultimately lead to distrust, and giving an even share to each co founder helps the company come first. Also, it's important to have equity discussion early so that both lawyers and shareholders will not need to be involved. Debunking myths. So these are some bullet points regarding myths and debunking them. So, for example, renting an office is unnecessary when starting off. The myth here is that an office is needed when starting off, and you know we're trying to say that that doesn't have to be true. It's possible that you can work in a garage, a library, coffee shop, or even a spare bedroom. And if a formal work setting is in fact required, one can visit AWS Labs to be in the proximity of technical experts. You can also keep an eye on monthly expenses like rent and payroll, and you can measure the rate at which profit grows. You can also measure the cost of acquiring new customers and follow set timetables in order to keep on pace with goals that you might have. So, this slide is about customer discovery. And in other words, it's about validating your idea by discussing your product with people you know. And that could be friends, family, or even potential customers. Customer discovery is evaluating, correcting, and refining your idea, and it requires a repetitive cycle, like building, learning, testing, and evaluating. The more customer feedback you have, the greater advantage you have, and you want to ultimately give customers what they crave. And this is a video on equity and compensation models. Day two, how to find and listen to customers. So, interviews with customers are ultimately the best way to receive feedback, and this is going to help you figure out what matters to them. Every idea starts with finding a new way to please customers, and the goal is to constantly update and to keep up with the customer's needs. Also, determine whether your services are going to be used by customers or other businesses. And here are some tips for actually communicating with your customers. So you can stay away from vague inquiries. You can avoid yes or no questions. You can inquire fundamental questions, which are designed to evince insight, and you can also have general open-ended questions because they're more beneficial. You can end conversations by asking your customer who else to talk to. So this forms a chain, excuse me, where you're constantly talking to people and updating the information which you have and kind of building off of it to get new information. So customer validation and understanding your market. So customer validation is just finding and comprehending the market that you have. And enthusiasm doesn't necessarily mean that you have a large market. But to determine how large your market is, you have to ask these specific questions. So you could ask, how large is the market? Like, is it large enough to support your business? How many people are going to be buying the product? And is it a new or already existing market? You can also see the CTR rate and you can create a sign up page for your product's launch. Also, you can consider how much money it's going to actually take to reach your markets. The software only products are going to cost much less compared to the hardware only ones. And you want to consider the implementation roadblocks, like following certain rules for the specific industry which is involved. You want to know your competition and learn from their mistakes in order to help set you apart from the rest. Building a prototype. So, a prototype is something which is created in order to see whether or not a certain product is going to succeed after launch. You want to focus on learning about your product rather than coding and adding to it. And a prototype must be added in order to make the product best suited for customers' needs. Do not hurry the process of making a product's prototype and check frequently to make sure the prototype follows your goal. Introducing the concept of an MVP. So, a minimal viable product is typically the first product a company makes. It's thought of as the simplest edition of a product that still proves a hypothesis. And as little features as possible it has as little features as possible which are required to support the key function. An MVP is the first product to be ready, for the customer market. And an MVP tests a hypothesis and it's basically a bare bones structure of what the idea was meant to be. But it's important to realize that just like a prototype, an MVP won't be ideal and that the MVP prioritizes functionality over aesthetics. Here's a slide on how to actually develop an MVP. So building an MVP has multiple repetitive cycles, and it goes through processes like designing, building, deploying, and measuring. With each addition of new processes, the MVP becomes steadily better, and it allows for the quick and responsive feedback from users. It's important that you keep the MVP simple. And there's a quote from Reid Hoffman, who's on the right, and who is an internet entrepreneur, which says, "If you aren't embarrassed by the first version of your product, you ship too late." And you also want to make sure that you add features after your hypothesis has been verified. This is a video on what an MVP is. So day 3 starts off with sprints. Sprints are a process that is used often when developing software, and a certain amount of time where predetermined work is completed is this. There's a fixed theme and objective, and it has a deliverable function. It should last about 1 to 2 weeks, and the shorter the better because your goals won't change. You want to make sure that you save customer feedback for the next sprint, and the prioritization focuses primarily on business functions. It focuses on primary business functions. You also want to focus on high effect and quick to build work. A quote from Nikki Stone, who's a senior software developer at AWS, says, "You have the capacity to build one great product. Make sure it's the right one." And the recommendations after sprints are continuous implementation and just constant delivery. So these are some of the potential pitfalls that you might face. An anti-pattern is a universal response to a conflict which is unproductive. And being prepared for something like this is going to help prevent whenever they undoubtedly show up. Technical debt gathers when engineers rush the work instead of focusing on both quality and proper implementation. And technical debt doesn't necessarily come from laziness, but instead a strategic decision to swiftly eradicate a conflict. Not generalizing code can lead to extra coding work and refactoring, and it's just undifferentiated heavy lifting. Also, customers want the product and don't mind you borrowing from existing resources. Fundamentals of working with AWS. So one-door decisions and two-door decisions are, a part of the fundamentals. And it's important that we realize that they don't happen equally. Two-door decisions are the most common and they occur the majority of the time. But one-door decisions should be thought through thoroughly. because security decisions are window decisions and they cannot be made. That's kind of like an example. When making security decisions, one has to consider both their and AWS's responsibilities, who gets access to certain objects amongst the workforce, and how much access the users receive. Startups on AWS receive enterprise level security, and AWS offers SSL and DDoS protection. In further detail, SSL basically just stands for Secure Sockets Layer, and standard security technology for creating a protected link between a web server and a browser, and is this one. DDoS, on the other hand, it stands for Distributed Denial of Service, and it's a cyber attack that interferes with the services of the host. Startups must know the relation of their product with the government, healthcare, and more, and they have to follow any rules and regulations of the field. Points of integration also have to be considered because developers won't be able to understand a product without proper documentation. An API is an application programming interface, and it's a set of guidelines to connect with another person's software. It's important that the correct database is selected for the type of data that is needed to be stored. Introduction to data architecture with AWS. So a monolithic architecture is an architecture that combines all the working parts of an application, like data input, output, processing, error handling, and more altogether into one singular program. It allows for the rapid movement as you don't need to make the processes ahead of time. A well-designed monolith can be scaled horizontally and then broken apart at a later date. Architecture applications like Amazon Elastic Beanstalk will automate all the processes for you, and it's much simpler to both work and handle. Microservices are independent services that each perform their own function, and these microservices work together as a single product. But if one goes down, the others are unaffected. And these microservices are good for scaling large systems, but they ultimately take longer to build. Also, it's important that we optimize data architecture for speed. Serverless is a type of architecture where servers that code is running on don't need to be set up by the user. This grants more time to focus on the code, and it automatically scales for the user to avoid the user from having to actually predict customer traffic on by themselves. So assessing your legal needs. A common legal decision that businesses make is whether or not they become a legal entity. A legal entity is when a company gains legal rights and obligations like tax filings. And there are multiple types of legal entities like limited liability. So you might be asking, what is limited liability? And it's the detachment of a personal resource or personal resources from business resources. It prevents the business owner's responsibility in both losses and legal liability, and it exists to help business owners take risks without the fear of legal action or liability. However, it's not perfect and is not a get out of jail free card. What are unincorporated entities? So these are businesses that do not have limited liability, and they're known as unincorporated entities. The two types are sole proprietorship and general partnerships. The sole proprietorship is owned by businesses and managed by one person, when on the other hand, a general partnership has numerous owners and splits up their responsibilities amongst these owners. There's no actual legal difference between the owner and the business itself, and sole proprietorship is cheaper to start, but it comes with less overhead. Also, sole proprietorship risks the owner's personal resources. This is a crash course in data architecture. Day 4 starts with finding a lawyer. So, an option for businesses that are a legal entity is to converse with large startup law firms. And these types of firms do not make business owners pay up front, but instead they take a percentage of the company. If business owners don't want to work with large law firms, they can work with startup friendly firms like Atrium. Atrium is a corporate law firm that uses machine learning software to automate legal processes. Another option to find counsel is colleague or friend recommendation. So NDAs, IP, and other legal considerations. An NDA stands for a non-disclosure agreement, and it's an agreement that prevents unauthorized disclosure of secrets. If one's assigning development work to an outside organization, then that organization should be signing an NDA. A venture capitalist provides startups with funds but receives a return investment. And a venture capitalist organization is most likely not going to sign an NDA. A founders agreement is a necessary legal step when there are multiple founders involved. They can outline the responsibilities of each founder involved. There's no template which has to be used as a reference. It can be hard to publicate. There are often numerous negotiations and it can be very time consuming to finish. But what's an intellectual property or IP protection? This is a type of legal concept which provides legal protection for assets. And the trademark is a type of IP protection which shields the product of a company from being copied. Patents guard an organization's product, and they give the patent owner the right to prevent others from using, creating, or selling their patented product. These patents usually last several years. And what is copyright? It guards original artistic work, and for most startups, copyright is the primary IP protection. Introduction to fundraising. So, fundraising is a full time job and should be taken seriously. Venture capital firms invest in companies they believe in and hope they will receive a large return. There are multiple investment types like pre seed, seed, and Series A and Series B. An investment that occurs early on before the company shows that the product will work. Series A and Series B is funding that's used to help continue the scale of the business. The pressure to deliver when a VC invests can be high, and it's very likely that a business, even with this kind of support, is going to be out of business in a few years. Some VCs also work in pre seed or seed funding, and pre seed funding typically occurs in the early stages of product development. It ranges from $50,000 to $250,000, and seed investments range from $250,000 to $1 million. In 12 to 18 months, a seed VC may want you to fundraise 2 times the amount given. And when fundraising to VCs, it adds another person to answer to. There are funding sources outside of VC, like angel investors, non dilutive funding, crowdfunding, and accelerator programs. Angel investors are wealthy people who are looking to passively fund startups with capital in exchange for equity and convertible debt. They don't expect or want a 50 times return on the investment, but they instead have a different motivation. They usually invest about $25,000 to $250,000, and sometimes a 3 to 5 times return would be wonderful for them. Non dilutive funding is money that is incorporated in order to support the product without having to give up any equity. Examples of this include bank loans or university or federal grants. Crowdfunding examples include Kickstarter and GoFundMe, and they may assist in providing early adopters. They may be more difficult than seed rounds. And accelerator programs are group-based programs where entrepreneurs produce their ideas into reality. They select a tiny percentage of companies and help make those companies grow. They usually invest approximately $20,000 to $150,000, and they ask for a 5 to 7% equity return investment. They offer mentoring, training, and feedback, and they usually last about 3 months. Crafting a fundraising narrative. A fundraising narrative basically shows why one is spending money in the first place. It's not the same as a pitch deck though because it's much less thorough. And although this is true, the primary questions still have to be answered, which basically include what are you creating, what is the most captivating factor of your business, how much progress has been made, what are you striving to achieve, and the narrative should be short and sweet, and it should have the ability to informally discuss it with potential investors. It should be quick so that it can be explained in 20 seconds or less. The first 10 seconds should be who you are, what you are doing, and why it's important. The last 10 seconds would be progress, milestones, and long-term vision. Find the one persuasive reason as to why your company should receive investment. A good narrative should have a strong financial plan to support its claim, and financial models are essentially inferences. That's fundraising for your business. That's a video on that. Day 5 starts off with talking about what makes a good pitch deck. So, your pitch deck is basically your business card, and it's given to those who are in the best position to help you, such as investors and mentors. One of the first things customers will see and will leave a huge impression about your company is this. The key areas of a pitch deck include problem and solutions, business models, and markets. And creating a deck is about starting with whatever is most persuasive. It's important to keep it incisive, and it's better to be concise than to make investors disinterested. Typically, a deck is 10 to 13 slides long, and you want to make sure your deck answers the whys behind the investments, like why is this a good opportunity, why is this the proper team to do it, and why is this specific round of funding necessary. How to prospect your initial fundraising funnel. So generate the contention amongst investors. The 3-to-1 rule is important in order to generate the competition between the investors. You want to be in the final stages of negotiation with the three investors at the same time, and it's estimated to need about 10 meetings between the investors in order to create a 3-to-1 situation. Some investor companies invest in numerous companies while others only invest in a limited amount. Tools like Crunchbase and LinkedIn can help find investors if you can't find 20 or more investors to start with. Other entrepreneurs have VC companies that work with them, which make it easy to get advice on how to approach them. You want to focus on people who are in the VC business and not just firms, though. Initiating fundraising modes. You want to spend approximately 10% of the time creating relationships with potential investors and founders later on in the process. Relationships can make it easy and quick to find high level investments, and you want to negotiate and finalize with an investor before moving on and searching for a new group. Understand the different types of people working at a VC firm, like partners, venture partners, principals, and associates. Partners are generally the people who make the most decisions. Venture partners are part time workers who are looking to source deals and make a couple investments. Principals are new to the business and are just starting to make deals. And finally, associates are people who can't make investments but can help business owners navigate through the investment process. Attempt to have a mutual acquaintance that ultimately introduces you to the investor. Understanding the stages of growth. So there are multiple stages of company growth with all different goals. Stage one is about delivering the product. So can your team build something that consumers are actually going to buy? And is the product ready to be sold on the market? After the first sale, one has to ask themselves if they can turn their customers into a full customer base. The objective here is to obtain a large amount of sales. Stage two starts off with expansion, and it says survival is basically guaranteed at that point, and investors are guiding businesses to further success. The startup is now considered a more mature business, and it's no longer just a beginner. But you have to do your homework in order to actually have a chance of reaching stage two. This is how to build a product roadmap. So, a guide through your business from making product to creating your first sale is a product roadmap. You want to create milestones throughout the map in order to help shareholders know where key important events are in a basic timeline. A/B testing helps to set apart two options when coming across how a certain variable must function. A/B test brings about valuable results about which option will perform the best based on a particular parameter or goal. It also helps make decisions less biased. An important decision when making a roadmap is deciding when to pivot. If your product development team starts heading in the wrong direction, a pivot to your roadmap can help get things back on track. If something's not working, don't force it and cause more trouble. Instagram pivoted their idea from being a check-in product to a place to post personal pictures to share with the world. Then they stripped off any non-essential features in order to both save money and better the app. Product and channel fit is how effective the product is going to be having at consumers finding it publicly. These are some common startup growing pains. So startups can cause very long hours and be extremely demanding, but there are ways to conduct business with greater results for your employees and your own products as well. You can create and enforce strict limits on work hours, and you can throw all the energy into a startup, which is actually going to hurt your product and its effectiveness. You can generate nourishment codes for all employees, which is just a finish line for each employee. And you can pay a great amount of attention to the hiring process. Employing people that fit your company culture is the ultimate goal. Interviewing is also critical, and it's important to consider if a candidate's going to contribute and not just be a non negative. A good interview question would be to ask how the candidate worked through a real life problem. At a startup with less than 100 employees, the CEO themselves should be making the hiring decisions. Culture. So culture is the persona of your company, and it's a mixture of work environment, the mission of the company, values, ethics, expectations, and goals. You want to think about having third-party voices giving a voice into the culture of your company because this might be a possible benefit. You want to also create a culture that can accommodate not just yours, but the community's strengths and weaknesses. It's important to realize that culture does not equal perks, and it's more difficult to generate. You want to find different ways to talk to employees en masse, and information is received differently by different people, mentally speaking. So, because of that, multiple passwords are going to have to be used in order to spread the necessary information. A founder should personally interview at least 50 people for the first hours and develop effective interview questions. It's important to realize that defining culture is not the end. And this is the bibliography. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.